Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today we're covering the most troll frame in all of Lancer. The Lich is not a support frame. Uh, it's a troll frame, is really what it is. It is such a bizarre frame, but honestly, one of the most interesting frames in the entire game. Honestly, I can't think of a single frame that is more fascinating than the Lich in mechanics, play style, and even just overall design. The Lich is an undying chronomancer that is many things at once and also the exact opposite. But let's go ahead and take a look at it. But first, before we get into that, you may have noticed my new shirt. I've been wearing some shirts from Into the AM, who has decided to sponsor the channel. And I gotta say, these cotton shirts are really, really nice. They all fit really well. I've been very happy with the sizes. And Into the AM does more than just graphic tees. But, obviously, I had to go with the Bigfoot shirt. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so, kind of had to rep where I come from. And I really do like these shirts a lot. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to be sponsored by them anyways. So if you want to help support my channel even just a little bit, and you're also in the market for some new shirts, go ahead and use the description go ahead and use the link down in the description below, where you can go and get 10% off on whatever you buy at their website. Graphic tees, hoodies, even plain tees that don't have any kind of graphics on them whatsoever. And honestly, they have this really good bundle deal. You can get 3 shirts for just a little over 60 bucks, and my 10% applies to that. So you get each of the 3 shirts for essentially less than 20 bucks, which if you buy a lot of graphic tees, that's a really good deal. So go ahead and check it out. Like I said, down in the description below. But let's go ahead and get on to talking about the Lich. So we're actually going to start with the stats for this one because they're very wonky, and I think you can already see why. So we have 0 armor and 4 HP. Now, you wouldn't believe me, but this is actually probably the tankiest mech in the game if you play it correctly. The Lich can absolutely take a beating and kind of even wants to, which we'll explain with the traits later, but let's continue with the stats. Its evasion is average. Its E-defense is actually really, really good. The highest in the game, or one of the highest in the game anyway, at 12, which makes it really good against any kind of system-based enemies that you might come across, something to keep in mind. Its heat capacity is really low. Its sensors is really good, being 15, which is one of the longer sensor ranges. Not the longest, but in the category of long sensor range. It has a tech attack of 1, which is really good. It means it's a very solid mech for hacking, and you're going to need to for a lot of what this mech has to offer. Its repair capacity is decently high, which is kind of troll, actually, because if you play the Lich correctly, you almost take no damage, but they're expecting you to mess up every once in a while, and you're going to stress your mech out or structure your mech out at least a few times, so that repair capacity is kind of necessary. Then we have a save target of 11. That's also super necessary because everything this mech does almost is completely centered around its saves. Its speed is on the upper end of average, and honestly, you're definitely going to want the higher speed. In fact, going with the Lich, going high agility is honestly not that bad of an idea. Obviously, systems is always good as well, and this mech has 8 system points, which is above average, which is really good. But high agility is good, and honestly, putting a few points in the hole is probably necessary so that you're, right now, at 4 HP, main weapon strength is enough to just structure your mech out, which is insane. And so beefing it up to at least like 8 HP is probably where you want to sit, which is only a few points a hull. So that would be my recommendation for this particular mech. But let's go ahead and take a look at its traits, because now we'll start to see what this mech is actually all about. So, Soul Vessel. If you've played League of Legends, this is very similar to how Echo's ult kind of works. You create a Soul Vessel at the start of every one of your turns, and then once per round as a reaction to any time you're hit by an attack, or you fail a save or check, take any damage or take any heat from any source other than, or even yourself. So you can even overheat your mech, which would cause it to stress out. But instead, as a reaction, you gain immunity to all the damage, heat, conditions, whatever from the triggering effects. And then you teleport back to the marker that you set at the beginning of your turn. So this allows you to, anytime you can go anywhere. You can be the test dummy for your team, run out in the open to identify where the enemies are, get blown to bits, teleport back to your soul vessel, and you're good to go. Though this also means that it is your core mechanic when it comes to surviving on the battlefield. Now, there is one more mechanic that kind of will help with this, but you want to make sure that if your soul vessel is in a bad spot, that you're not necessarily putting yourself in a bad situation where teleporting back to it is going to screw you over, because you only get this once per round. So once you do it, you're in trouble. And in addition to this, you can't take this reaction if you're jammed, stunned, or grappled, or unable to take any reactions for any reason. So you have to really be careful, because that can completely screw over your entire situation. Now, you can use this reaction if failing a save or a check would make you jam, stun, or grapple. You just can't do it if you're already it's already happened. So something to keep in mind. But the other trait we have is Immortal. Now, this is once per scene, and if you are destroyed for whatever reason, even if the pilot dies, which is your character technically in this situation, as a reaction at the end of anyone's turn for the next round, essentially after you're destroyed, you can teleport back to where your soul vessel is, and you come back with full HP, no heat, but with one structure and one stress. Now, if you don't take this reaction in that round, you are just gone forever. So we have Immortal being our overall safety net. Like, if things get really bad, if we misplay a lot and we actually accidentally get ourselves destroyed, Immortal is going to keep us going. And legitimately, even with how low the base health of the Lich is, Immortal is not likely to go off super often. What's more likely to happen is your mech is about to be destroyed by, like, its core melting down, or you get a really bad roll on one of your structures, and then you're like, oh, darn it. And so you won't even actually go all the way just down to 0. You're like, well, I guess I'll just blow up then, and then come back with one structure and one stress, because that's really all you can do. Soul Vessel is the core mechanic, as I said before, and the major aspect of it is you want your soul vessel to be in a secure-ish location where when you come back to it, it's not going to get immediately destroyed. And then you play around this aspect. And if you start a turn in a really bad spot, then you have to move to some safe, secure location and then wait around before your soul vessel resets so you can do the crazy stuff again. Now, your mech has a massive sensor range, as I talked about before, with a 15 sensor range, and a really good save target. So you're going to be hacking, you're going to be doing whatever you can to the enemies in the meantime, doing all kinds of wacky stuff. But as I said before, your mech is potentially one of the strongest mechs when it comes to tanking in the game, because you can just choose to take immunity to all damage from any given source. So all you have to do is go out, bait enemy fire, do whatever, and then bounce back. The enemy has to either move again or do whatever to attack, hopefully, like someone else or even you again, and probably waste the rest of their action. So you can disrupt enemy turns. You can be a really good tank. There's a player in our live play we did on the channel. If you check out the live tab, and the wand is what it called, you will see a player who actually used their Lich as more of a tank. And there's a lot of other actions that are really good thanks to the license and thanks to the high save target and the bonus to tech attack. So I would say the Lich is more accurately a controller slash support slash not quite a defender quite yet, but they do have some capability of being a defender thanks to the license and thanks to how Soul Vessel will work as well. So there's a lot of good uses with this mech. The only thing that this mech is really bad at, as you can see here, is striking or artillery, I guess, for that matter, as it only has a main aux mount. Now, a main aux mount is really good. If you're going to have only one mount, having a main aux is really good because now you can have a main weapon and an aux weapon on top of it, which does offer a lot of options. But let's go ahead and talk about the core system here, which is Chrono Stutter. So Chrono Stutter is the action that turns this mech into a pure defender. And it's really goofy and really, really fun. So you activate Glitch Time as a quick action. And now for the rest of the scene, once per round, when any character successfully attacks, affects, take action against another character within your sensors, you can interrupt that action and do a variety of things. So first, the character being targeted is teleported within 3 spaces in any direction of your choice from where they initially were, even if they have immunity to involuntary movement. Though there are some situations where that still can't happen, as immunity is not the penultimate in this game. There are some things that supersede immunity. I would have to look through all the licenses to double check, but just know that immunity is a most of the time situation, not always an all the time situation. So you have to be careful when teleporting people in this way, but most of the time, you don't have to worry about it. You can teleport them 3 spaces away, and then you teleport to one of the spaces originally occupied by the character. So if they're a larger character, as the Lich is a size 1, you can be in any of its 3 hexes, essentially, or as close as possible, but no matter how far away it was. So it doesn't matter, as long as they were within sensor range, you teleport to where they are because you use this effect, obviously. And then the initial attack or action resolves with you as the target, and anything that action does affects you. So if getting hit by this action would teleport you, you then teleport. If doing this action would give you a condition, it would do a condition. If it's a knockback effect, you are the one getting knocked back instead. So why would you do this, right? Why would you, with the squishy mech, use this not even reaction? Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. This isn't a reaction. This is just an effect that takes place once per round at your decision whenever the trigger procs. So what you do is then you proc Soul Vessel. And because you teleport to your ally or their location, typically is when you would use this one, no matter what, you would then bounce back to wherever your Soul Vessel is, which is probably super far away. So what Glitch Time does is it allows you to take the place of an ally that is being affected by something, which is really good. It lets you use your Soul Vessel for someone else, and maybe even Immortal if your Soul Vessel was already used. And that's actually not even the 100% the use for this, because it's whatever the action is being taken against the target. So if the target is being healed, you become the one healed instead. If the target is being buffed, you're the one being buffed instead. And the crazy thing is there's no save. So anytime an enemy is being buffed, bam, you move them 3 spaces, you take the effect. And then if they're like, oh, shoot this guy, then you just Soul Vessel out of there afterwards. It's super troll. It's super interesting. I absolutely love Chrono Stutter. I think it's a really cool system to use, and it uses your best qualities as a mech for the sake of your team. So the Lich itself is a troll. It can disrupt actions. It has so many interesting ways to be played. Giving it a defined role, I think, does it injustice, as the Lich is timeless. It is unknowable, even. It is such a fascinating mech, and the license has many other similarly fascinating aspects. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the license, but before we do, if you like Lancer content, I recommend liking the video. This increases the chance that Lancer videos get more out in the algorithm. As you know, the algorithm is not very favorable to Lancer content, and it's very hard to find anyone who's making content on the game, so that really helps. And if you like my content specifically, I recommend subscribing as I cover a wide variety of games. And as well, I'll be covering a bunch of stuff with Lancer. I actually almost have all the base frames done from the core game and its additional splat books. And I'll be looking at some of the third-party content that's available on CompCon as well in the near future. So if you want to see all that, I recommend subscribing. But let's go and take a look at the license. All right, starting off with, we have a weapon. Now, normally, I really like weapons in the first tier of any of the licenses. It makes it really fun to look around, pick something up, pick a really cool weapon up. The Unraveler is going to be one of those exceptions, unfortunately. So the Unraveler is a main launcher weapon that has a range of 10 and does 2d6 damage. Now, 2d6 damage is a lot of damage, actually. But there is a major problem with it. The weapon itself is, if the attack would not deal enough damage to destroy its target or cause it to at least take a structure damage, it does reliable 2 even on hit. So unless you roll enough damage to destroy an enemy or at least structure them down, it does 2 damage. And it has reliable 2, so this weapon will always do 2 damage, except that it doesn't apply armor piercing. And that's kind of the kicker for me, is if this had armor piercing, I'd be way happier with this weapon. But it doesn't. It's just reliable 2. So if the enemy even has 1 point of armor, this does 1 point of damage no matter what, unless you're able to structure out the enemy. And if they have 2 points of armor, this does nothing unless you are able to structure out the enemy, which if they have 2 armor becomes that much harder. So Unraveler is a good weapon against enemies that don't have a lot of HP and don't have a lot of armor. But it sucks against anything that even has remotely any defenses or a decent amount of HP. Now, 2d6 is potentially a lot, and you could potentially roll, like 12 damage. And there are ways you can add bonus damage to the Unraveler to make it where it is more effective. There are ways you can build Unraveler to make it work. A bunch of bonus damage to make it more likely to at least structure an enemy or just straight out destroy an enemy is generally the way you're going to want to go. And this is where I'm going to mention one of the biggest talents taken with Lich typically is Nuclear Cavalier. It makes it a lot easier to use the Unraveler because as long as you're in the danger zone, you will most likely to be doing extra damage on top of everything, which will make you more likely to destroy an enemy. But that's just a lot, and it forces the Lich to play in a very specific way to make the Unraveler work. And the Unraveler as a main weapon it's either you build for this launcher or you just use a different weapon. But there's not really an in-between because its base functionality makes it difficult to use. Now, I know a lot of people really do love the Unraveler, and I do think that there are some really fun things you can do with this particular weapon. But for me, when I look at a weapon, especially when it's in the first rank of a license, I want to add that weapon to a different kind of play style or a different kind of mech. I want something that becomes an option for me. But the Unraveler is such a selfish weapon that you need to build specifically for it that it really just becomes unappealing to me a lot of the time. I'm sure if you are going to disagree, and that's completely okay. I'm not saying you're wrong. The Unraveler, because of its base damage, is one of the best main weapons if you can get it to work. But there's just so many times I've seen the Unraveler just do poorly because it's so specific in its use that I would just rather take something a lot simpler or that works in a lot more builds than this weapon. And for the Lich specifically, you're going to be using your actions for a lot of other things. So the Unraveler makes for a decent weapon when the enemy is really low and you just want to try to finish them off. But and due to the Lich's high system points, you can add a lot more features that might make the Unraveler work. So it's not necessarily bad for the Lich either, but it's definitely, when you're playing the Lich, shouldn't be the focus of your playstyle, which this weapon really kind of demands of you almost. So I'll say I'm 50-50 on it. It's either really good or really bad, depending on how you want to take it. For me, more often than not, I just kind of skipped the Unraveler, which is very unfortunate because I do think it's a very interesting weapon. Next up, we also have Wandering Nightmare. Now, this is a really good 1-point system. It's a 1-point system that's insane for use. And honestly, I've seen this one used in so many builds in so many interesting ways that this is such a great first rank pickup. So for 1 system point, as a full tech action, so it does have a bit of an action cost, so you have to be careful. You generate a blast 2 zone of distorted time flow within your sensor range. Now, any characters in this affected area cannot take any reactions. And if they start in this area, they need to make a system save, or they take 2 heat and become slowed until the end of their next turn. So when they start their turn in this, they need to make a system save, and if they fail, they're slowed for that turn and their next turn, which is essentially 2 rounds of slow, which is insane. Now, this effect lasts until this action is taken again. So it lasts for potentially the whole battlefield. Wandering Nightmare can be used in so many builds, and one of the kickers to this one is this affects all characters but you, the one using it. So you can exist in this hell zone with no issues. Now, I will say this does affect your allies, so you have to be careful. But one of the interesting things about this one is its main use is to block a zone off to enemies. Enemies are going to see this zone, and they're like, well, I don't want to be there. And so they you set this in a place like at a juncture in a hallway where an enemy who wants to shoot at your allies and wants to keep cover has to either choose to be in the zone or has to full invest and go all the way into the hallway you're in, or in an area where you want to keep enemies generally out of, like the interior of like a warehouse or something, where you as the Lich can set your soul vessel and then you can run out, do your things, get shot, pop back in. Enemies have to make a choice. If they want to try to finish you off, they have to go into this hell zone to do it. Now, setting Wandering Nightmare out just in the middle of nowhere is typically not a good choice. But what you can do with this one is if an enemy is already acted or they're not going to act for a while, you can drop this on some enemies, hopefully multiple enemies, and they no longer get reactions, which can potentially allow your allies to move through a zone, get past some Overwatch. Hopefully you don't hit your allies as well in the zone, and you can negate enemy reactions with this one. And this is all just for a single system point. The worst part about this is it's a full tech action, so you're dedicating your time to setting up the zone. But because you're generally immune to this one, Wandering Nightmare can be used as for tanks. Like if you're a grapple build, which, you know, like the Blackbeard or any other kind of grapple build in the game, you grapple the enemy and then potentially just drop this on yourself in the next turn, or you grappled with a overcharge and then you use Wandering Nightmare, that enemy is now in a lot of trouble because they can no longer take any reactions. And when their turn starts, they have a good chance of becoming stunned or slowed. Sorry, not stunned, slowed, and taking 2 heat. And they still have to deal with your grapple. So Wandering Nightmare is really, really good. I absolutely like this one. And for a tier 1, a rank 1 pickup from the license, you couldn't ask for more. So this one is definitely an S tier system, in my opinion. All right, starting here at rank 2, along with the Lich, you also get AntiLinear Time. Now, this is a 2-point system, and this is essentially a quick tech action that you choose a character within sensors, and they are cleared of all conditions other than stuns that weren't self-inflicted. So everything, and I might have missed this a couple of times, everything that the Lich does cannot prevent anything self-inflicted except for Soul Vessel with itself. But if it's for someone else, it can't prevent anyone from doing something self-inflicted to themselves, very typically. So if I missed that before, I apologize. I tried to mention it. I think I missed it with Chrono Stutter. You can't block anything that essentially is self-inflicted. But anyway, so for AntiLinear Time, you clear all their conditions except for stuns that weren't self-inflicted, and then you immediately receive all conditions they cleared until the end of your next turn. Now, this can be paired with your reaction for Soul Vessel. Granted, that means now for the next round, your Soul Vessel is down, which is not really good. AntiLinear Time is a pure support ability that you can do to take a condition from an ally, and you receive this condition until the end of your next turn. But that's actually a really good thing because they might have a condition that has a much longer timer that you can essentially reduce by taking it yourself. This is overall a great support action. If you are playing a support style of play and you're taking a look at the Lich for its support capabilities, AntiLinear Time is a really good pickup. Though I will say in a lot of battles, sometimes it's just better to let your allies deal with it themselves and do something for yourself. Like, obviously, you don't want to be jammed or grappled or anything because then you can't use your soul vessel. So there's actually several conditions that prevent the Lich from really wanting to use anti-linear time that might another mech with this system might take instead. So you do have to really pick and choose as the Lich when you use anti-linear time, but I'm really glad it's here and it's very interesting. So overall, a pretty okay system. Next up, we have probably one of the best buff debuff kind of hacks in the game. So it's a 2-system quick tech action you can take, and the first one is haste. Now, haste allows you to choose a character within your line of sight and sensors, and for the rest of the scene, or until they take damage, which is likely to happen in most situations, they may boost once per round as a free action during their turn. So haste is really good on a lot of people, but actually it's also really good on the Lich itself, as the Lich, if you play correctly, is not likely to take damage, actually. So getting this free boost once per round is only good. You can also drop this on some of your allies that you know are safe for the remainder of the round. Maybe their enemies have already acted or the like. You can drop it on your ally. Now they get some boosts and hopefully they can keep it up. But since it's just a quick tech action, this is honestly really easy to drop off on your allies to really help them out throughout the battle. So an insanely good support action. But now we have slow, the debuff version. You choose a character within line of sight and sensors. They must pass a system save or take 2 heat, which is similar to an invade, and they become slowed and become unable to take reactions. This effect ends if they take any amount of damage or make a successful system save as a quick tech action. Slow is a debuff, and it's very good, except it can be dispelled essentially when the enemy takes any amount of damage. So you want to drop this off on an enemy that is likely to act in the next round so that at the very least they are slowed, affected by it, and then your allies might be able to move away. But you can also drop this on an enemy that's already acted that maybe has one of your allies engaged so that ally can move away without proccing Overwatch. So there's a lot of good ways that you can use slow as both a debuff and as a way to support your allies as well. And it most of the time, because of your very high save, is likely to make the enemy to take 2 heat, which is not a bad thing to do as well. My only gripe with slow is because it can be dispelled essentially by the enemy taking any amount of damage. It's very hard to capitalize on this, as you almost want to use it on enemies that are not likely to get damaged because they're slowed for the duration and they can't take reactions for the duration. So if there's like a sniper enemy that it has a reaction, like a massive Overwatch range, they'll hit anyone who moves or does anything, then yeah, slow is really, really good for that specific kind of enemy. But Unhinged Chronology, I would say mostly is best for the haste. And even the 2 system points for haste alone, I think is worth it. The slow, kind of just a little bit of extra that I think is good in some situations, but if you play incorrectly, can feel like it really doesn't do much of anything other than potentially add heat to an enemy. So in any regard, Unhinged Chronology is genuinely a really good set of a system with 2 really good actions. All right, at rank 3, we have Stay of Execution. Now, this ability is a little rough, in my opinion, but it's really good for what it's intending to do. So, it's a quick tech action, and you designate either yourself or another character. That target gains immunity to all damage and effects from external sources until the end of their next turn, at which point they're then stunned until the end of their following turn. And nothing can prevent or clear this stunned condition. Now, during this time, any active effects on your target is frozen and effectively paused. The timers will resume when the effect ends, but you can't use Stay of Execution to waste the ticking of an action. Like if an ally has a bomb on them that's about to go off in one round, if you use this effect on them, that doesn't make the bomb just go off and not affect them. The bomb gets stopped until they're no longer affected, and then it'll go off at the appropriate time. An unwilling character can ignore this effect with a successful system save. So there are situations where you could technically try to use this offensively. Yeah, sure, you do make the enemy immune to all damage and effects for a round, but then they're stunned no matter what. So, they might not want that stun despite the immortality. But honestly, more than likely, you're going to be using this on yourself or an ally. And if an ally doesn't want it, they have a save out, which is good because being stunned is really, really bad. And this is where I find it's rough because Stay of Execution is really bad to use on the Lich itself because it makes you vulnerable to actually getting killed. Because when you're stunned, you can't use your reaction and you can't prevent it with your soul vessel, meaning you are setting yourself up to be destroyed with your minimum amounts of HP. Now, using this on an ally might be a bit easier, and an ally who is stunned, and you can potentially just clear the stun. Oh, well, you can't clear the stun. So you want to use this on an ally, and they're going to get stunned. You can't clear the stun. You can't do anything to stop this, but you do this give them essentially a full round of being immune. And for the Lich itself, you do have this extra benefit of when you use it on yourself, it lasts until the end of your next turn. So for the remainder of that round, and if you choose to go last in the next round, through the whole next round, you're just immune to everything. You can run, be a meat shield all you want. You can use your core system to just take shots for your allies. In a lot of ways, this can be used in a lot of good ways, but it will just make you vulnerable to death if the situation doesn't get dealt with. So I will say Stay of Execution, if used correctly, is incredibly powerful, but that stun is insanely dangerous, and it becomes a double-edged sword. You may save an ally from one death, only to subject them to another. So I'll say Stay of Execution is good, but it has a pretty high skill use, and you need to very much prep ahead of time if you want to make the most use out of this and make sure it's not punished overly well. Using this on maybe an ally who's just incredibly tanky might be the best, as that ally can take a few beatings for a full round and hopefully make it out on the other side without any major problems. So I will say this can be used very well. It's also a limited system, so if you don't have a lot of engineering, you can only use this twice, but honestly, twice is probably all I would see it used in a normal battle anyway. So investing in engineering isn't even necessary to make the most out of Stay of Execution. So overall, good, though be prepared. You do need to have a pretty high skill level to make good use out of this one. Finally, we're here at the end, and we have the Dimus class NHP. It's actually been a good while since we've done any NHPs here on any of these reviews. I really like NHPs. I think they're very interesting. They add a lot of interesting things. And Didymus is incredibly interesting. It's a 3-point system, which is expensive, but it isn't an NHP, and they always tend to be at least 3 points. And it provides you the ability to essentially split an ally in two, allowing them to pick 2 different routes. So, or yourself, potentially. So what it does is it gives you access to the time split quick tech action. This action here allows you to take either yourself or another character within sensors and line of sight, which they can choose to ignore this effect with a system save. So, typically you want to get your allies' permission before you use this, but essentially you cause them to disappear. They just leave the battlefield, and instead they're replaced with two fields that are as it says fields, but they're actually just two ghost copies, you can think of it, of said character. They take up the same amount of space, so they same size, same shape, everything. I do love here that says, though you shouldn't look at them too long. And they become these kind of constructs or obstructions that have a 10 HP, which is not bad, a speed of 5, an evasion of 5, an E defense of 5, and a heat cap of 5, and have immunity to all conditions and statuses, but not to damage. Now, the only actions they can take is the standard move and boost, and the only reaction they can take is to disperse this effect, which I'll mention here in a moment. They do count as hardcover, which is very interesting. And so the whole point of this one is you convert either yourself or your ally into a set of obstructions, essentially. They can move in whatever direction they want. And this starts on their next turn. So if you do use this on yourself, it doesn't take place until the start of your next turn. And you want to make sure you use it after you used all your other actions, because you leave the battlefield when you use this. So don't use it on yourself until after you've done everything else on your turn and then you can use the quick tech action. But on your ally, this will prevent them from using their reaction. So you also have to be careful. But now what happens is as they move and do whatever, when one of these fields disappears, the character immediately takes the place of the other one. Now, the speed 5 is actually massive. That's a lot of speed. So dropping this on a tank is actually really good because, one, if your defenders on your team are already using Guardian to make hardcover anyway, they're just doing the same thing, but now likely many of them are just faster with a speed 5. Their evasion is lower and they are likely to take damage, but so what? They want to take damage. And once this facsimile gets destroyed, they just take the place of the other one, and now they're just wherever they need to be, all set and ready to go. This is really good. You can use this in so many different ways. If you use this on yourself, you disappear, and then your two facsimiles are there creating hardcover. Hopefully they don't get destroyed before the start of your next turn, and then you can have them move out, guard your allies, do whatever as the Lich. This is really good. And even then, even after one of them gets destroyed, you're still a Lich. You still dropped your soul vessel, so the enemy will shoot you, and you just soul vessel out of there. And so you can essentially create a bunch of targets for the enemy that are not going to net them anything in the end. And if you use this on an ally, even if they're like an assassin type ally, striker mech who wants to get into the back line and destroy the squishies, well, now you create two targets that the enemy has to burst down quickly so they can reveal you to then deal with them. And because they can split up or do whatever, this makes them very hard to deal with on a battlefield that has a lesser amount of enemies. So this can be used in a lot of ingenious ways. Now, time split can only be used, it has limited 3, so the system itself can only be used 3 times in a combat. But I mean, that's really more than you're going to need, so you don't even have to invest in any engineering to get the most out of this time split. And this is still a AI or an NHP, so you can do all the really cool things that NHPs typically can do for your team. So overall, the Dimus class NHP is really, really good. It's very cool. It's very strategic. And that's just kind of where I'm going to leave with the Lich here. The Lich is a strategic mech. It is designed to be used in very intelligent ways. So if you're a player who likes to use their 5-head to come up with brilliant strategies, the Lich is actually for you, which is actually why it's a really cool mech for me. I'm surprised it's not one of my more favorite ones, and honestly, I might be convinced later that it is. I think there's a lot of really cool things with this one, and it works really well if you're very strategic. And even if you're not very strategic, even if you're a little bit of a smooth brain, this mech has so many fail safes that you can, if you build just a bunch of hull onto this mech and just build like a normal defender mech, you make a near indestructible mech, because even if the enemy does manage to eventually get you down, you just have Immortal waiting for you to back you up so that you can pop back up, which is really good. So overall, the Lich is an insanely good mech, a very high class mech that has a very high skill ceiling and a pretty decent skill floor, as well as you don't really need to be that smart to make the most use out of it. And many of its parts, like Wandering Nightmare or Unhinged Chronology, can be used in a wide variety of different mechs and playstyles as well, which makes this mech very good for picking up stuff, even if you don't intend on using the frame itself. So that's going to be it for the Lich. We are done with Horus for now, anyway, until they release any more Horus mechs, which, you know, I'm really looking forward to anything else they release, which means we are down to the last 2 frames of this series before we hit the third-party content. We have the Zhang from IPS North Star, and we have the Emperor from Smith Shimano. So the last 2 videos, I'm so excited. Hopefully I've covered your favorite mech already at this point. Make sure you share these videos out there. I want people to get interested in Lancer, and I've already seen in the comments so many people convinced to play the game just by watching my videos. So I'd like that to happen more often. I like the channel to do better, obviously, but I want more people to play Lancer first and foremost. So share the video. I'm excited. We're almost done. And I'm so sad it took so long to get to the Lich. I was just kind of doing them in order as they are on these lists here. But now that it's out, I know a lot of people have been very excitedly waiting for this one. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.